Alright, so this time we're going to be going over reflections. A reflection is a transformation that flips a figure over a line of reflection. So if I have a reflection over the y-axis, so the biggest thing to remember here is that whatever axis we flip it over. So remember, the x is the one that goes left and right, and the y is the one that goes up and down. So whatever axis I flip it over is the value of the point that I do not change. So if I have a reflection over the y-axis and they give us the points a, b, c, well, let's plot a prime, b prime, and c prime. So a prime would be -1 and 4, b prime would be -1 and 1, and c prime would be -4 and 3. And if y'all notice, if you should see a pattern, we notice the y value in every point doesn't change. 4 is still 4, 1 is still 1, 3 is still 3. But with the x values, we change them. We switch their sign. So if it was positive, it became a negative. So +1 became -1. +4 became -4. So that's how we do a reflection over the y-axis. Is whatever the x value is, we change the sign, and the y value stays the same. So xy becomes -xy. So it doesn't matter whatever the x value is. So let's say the x value is -2 and the y value is 4. Well, that would change to 2, 4. All I did was I changed the sign of the x, and the y stays the same. If we reflect it over the x-axis, so when we reflect it over the y-axis, we don't change the y. But when we reflect it over the x-axis this time, we don't change the x. So if you look here, if we don't change the x value, then I can just rewrite the x. So it should be 1, 1, and 4. And then the y value is just going to switch signs. So instead of +4, it'll become -4. Instead of +1, it would be -1. Instead of +3, it would be -3. So if I did this correctly, then a, b, c prime, so a prime should be at 1 and -4. That's correct. B prime should be at 1 and -1. That's correct. And c prime should be at 4, -3. That's correct. And then algebraic rule, xy transforms to x -y. Now again, that does not mean that it's always going to be a positive becomes a negative. If your y value is already negative, you have to change the sign of it from a negative to a positive. So the negative sign in front does not dictate that it is saying it is a negative. The negative sign in front is just telling you to change the sign of whatever the original y value is. So now let's do a practice. So we draw the image of the quadrilateral ABCD after reflection over the y-axis. So we have to plot ABCD first. So A is -5, +1, B is -5, +4, C is -1, +3, and D is -2, +1. So if we reflect it over the y value does not change if we reflect it over the y-axis. So all my y values should stay the same. Should be 1, 4, 3, and 1. But my x values are all going to change. So -5 will become +5. -5 will become +5. -1 will become +1. And -2 will become +2. So let's plot those points and see if it looks the same. So 5 and 1. So that's A prime. 5 and 4. So that's B prime. 1 and 3. C prime. And 2 and 1. D prime. Connect dots. And it should look like a mirror image reflection of the shape from before, just over the y-axis. So then my algebraic rule. So here's the cool thing about algebraic rules, unlike the last two things we've done. The algebraic rule for reflection, it's either going to be one of two things. It's either going to be negative xy or x negative y. And then if we reflect it over the y-axis, it's going to be just like this rule that we had over here. Xy becomes negative xy. So the rule here is xy becomes negative xy. Okay, for the next one, the last one, I want you to do two things. I know the question only tells you to plot AB and then reflect it over the x-axis. Well, we're going to do a reflection over the x, and we're going to do a reflection over the y. So the first thing we do is we need to plot the points. So A is negative 2 and 3, and B is 2, 1. Then we need to plot them. So negative 2, 3, 2, 1. We're going to call that A, B, and then we're going to draw our line. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a reflection over the x-axis. Okay, so let's do the x-axis reflection in blue. So remember, if we do the x-axis reflection, we do not change the x. So I'm going to want you to pause the video. I want you to go ahead and do what you think it is going to be, and then check to see if you did it correctly. So the x-axis, we do not change the x value. So the a prime should be negative 2 for the x value, and then b prime should be positive 2 for the x value. The y value changes though. So positive 3, we're going to change that sign to a negative 3, and positive 1, change the sign to a negative 1. And let's plot those. So negative 2, negative 3, positive 2, negative 1. So a prime and b prime. So then we connect the dots. And we should notice that should look like a mirror reflection over the x-axis. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is now we're going to do a reflection over the y-axis. So again, we're reflecting the points in red, reflect them over the y-axis. We have a prime and b prime. So I want, again, remember, we reflected over the y-axis. We do not change the y. So pause the video, go ahead and try it on your own, and then see if you did it correctly. Okay, so y-axes, we don't change them. So my y value should still be 3 for a prime and 1 for b prime. Then we need to change the sign of the x value. So negative 2 will become positive 2. Positive 2 will become negative 2. Don't know why I put a 3 there. So then we plot those 2, 3, and then negative 2 and 1. So a prime and b prime. Now if you notice, the green looks a little bit different than what we've seen before. The reason being is because in all the other ones we've done, all the points have always been inside the same quadrant. So it makes your life a little bit easier when all your points are in the same quadrant, because then when you reflect it over the axes, they change quadrants. So this went from quadrant 2 to quadrant 1. This went from quadrant 1 to quadrant 4, etc. But this one, if you notice, we have A is in quadrant 2 and B is in quadrant 1. So when we did a reflection over the x, it wasn't hard to see because we were completely changing the quadrants. But now when we do this reflection, it might not look right, but it's still a proper reflection. Because when we reflect over the y-axis, we have to look at each individual point. My a value started on the left, and when I reflected over the y, now it moves to the right side of the y-axis. My b value started on the right side of the y-axis, and when we reflect it, now it's on the left side of the y-axis. So as a whole, it looks weird, but if we look at each individual point, we did a proper reflection. So be careful about that. So, algebraic rule describing reflection. For the x-axis one, we have x, y, transforms, and remember, we do not change the x value, so the x value stays the same, and the y value changes signs. Then for the y-axis reflection, we have x, y, that's my starting point, and it transforms. Do not change the y value, so y value this time will stay the same, and my x value changes signs. And that is the correct way of doing that. I will post the last video for rotations tomorrow. And then make sure you do all your worksheets you need to do as well.